Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Magic Arena Run. Today, we are taking a look at a very interesting series in top 10. I did not really want to do a Halloween top 10 one because I don't personally celebrate Halloween. And two, we are having and Crimson Vow is coming out very soon, so any horror or monster themed top 10 would get very quickly invalidated if I don't include Crimson Vow. But I decided to do something else based on a fandom that I recently been interested in. It's a series of top 10 mini games in Magic. So these are like we're already playing a game of Magic, but we're talking about some of the interesting things that you kind of you kind of made to do. They're actually a lot of times in mathematics. It's like these are like different decisions you make in game theory. So in a sense, they're kind of mini games in that sense. Well, first off, what's not included? Well, we are not including cards that just simply have the opponent make a decision. So, like Fact or Fiction, is the main staple. Like you get 5 cards, you separate into 2 piles. Your opponent has to make a decision. This is, I think, in terms of in game theory, this is referred to as like the cake, the one where one brother cuts the cake, the other brother chooses to slice so that it's as fair as possible. Then the other one I did not include is like Punisher style cards where you play a card, it has a great effect. It has 1 or 2 effects depending on what your opponent chooses. Browbeat is it's pretty much the poster child of this one. Again, this is based on, these are 2 different versions of cards where your opponent just has to make a decision. In the case of Fact or Fiction, most people do not know how to play this game, so it's actually very hard. It's really slanted towards you. While in Browbeat, it's usually slanted towards the opponent. The opponent can easily just make the lesser of 2 evils. You really don't get what you want. Also not included are a lot of the silver bordered games that are just one-offs, like Hangman, or there's this card called Arm to Arm, which just makes you do arm wrestling. There are some games that that are a bit closer, so those might fall in line. But a lot of the individual ones in Silver Borderland don't make the cut here. We're talking about basically categories of games here. So number 10, this is probably I have to include this here, but I really hate this one. This is the gotcha mechanics. So basically, it's a simple game. I set a condition, or I set a rule that cannot be broken. The moment you break the rule, that's a gotcha moment. I get a reward. It's not really much of a game in the sense that only one person seems to win. Well, that's kind of true for a lot of the other mini games, so to speak. But this is definitely what we would call the definition of a game that is no fun. So one way to think of this is that gotcha is a game where as long as I do absolutely nothing, you can't win. Now, if there was a certain time limit, and then that would have been great. But this one's just a game where, for the entirety of the rest of the game of Magic, the common cycle is you can't just say a certain word. The uncommon cycle is much worse. Like, you can't say numbers, you can't touch the table, you can't laugh, you can't touch your face. So you're literally hamstringing yourself this way. So it's there as a mini game, but even the great designer Mark Rosewater. Why did I put great designer? He's the head designer. Great designer probably it's arguable depending on who you talk about it with. But he did state that this was probably the worst mechanic he introduced to Silver Bordered. I will note that there is one card of gotcha that I approve. That would be Stop That. You really don't like to see people flicking their cards. It's kind of like it's one of the annoyances in paper that you don't get in digital. So that's just probably the only one I approve. But other than that, the gotcha mechanic as a whole, really horrible. But it's still a mini game in a sense, so that's why it's here at number 10. Number 9. This one kind of like gotcha, but Di- but this time, well, actually depends. A lot of the good ones, you are the one playing the card. It has a relatively good effect. Well, actually, it's questionable in the case of working stiff, since you're just playing it for a 2/2 and you can never bend your arm. You can not bend your elbows ever. But they did improve the design in Skull Saucer. You get the kill effect. You get the 4/1 flyer. You just have to keep your head on the table. For the most part, it's pretty much self-inflicted. Actually, in Unglued, it was a bit worse because it's something that you did to your opponent. So that one, in a way, is similar to Gotcha. I'm not surprised that that one did not work as well. But they started to improve over time. So this is a case of where you see, okay, I have this mini game. It's not quite working. How do I make it better? So iteration is always key. So if so, number 9 would be the physical mechanic, or rather, it's the physical constriction mechanic. What's another proper term for that? Before, let's keep it PG. Let's move on to number 8. Number 8. This one is the mana value matters mechanic. Well, this one's a case of like um, where you get a certain trigger if you cast a spell of a certain mana value. Now, a lot of cards do this, even in regular land, but the one I want to highlight is the one where you are doing it in a certain sequence, or a series of mana values matter. So I from Unhinged, I bring up bingos. You literally have a bingo table from 0 to 8. Now this is one where you are paying attention to the rest of the table, so this is actually good for commander in a sense. Then and then we have Baron von Count, where it's literally just a countdown. You're counting down from 5 to from you're counting down from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then you get a really powerful effect. Actually, this is not even mana value matters in this sense, because, well, it's mana value matters for bingo, but for Baron von Count, it just counts everything in the card. But these are very interesting. It's more interactive in bingo. Kind of wish it was kind of spread out there, but it is an interesting mini game in its own right. So we'll leave that here at number 8. Speaking of flipping things, number 7, this one, believe it or not, is actually a sort of mini game that is in regular Magic. So this is where, what's the top card? So the very first poster child for this. Actually, there have been many cards, but pretty much the most famous one for this in Modern would be Counterbalance. Back in the day when Sensei's Divining Top was still a thing. So it's on board. There's some tension. I cast a spell. You may reveal the top card of your library. Then, if the Sensei's Divining Top was there, yeah, there's still some agency. But even then, there is the tension that your opponent might not have the appropriate converted mana cost to counter it. The modern version of this now is the Delver of Secrets game, where you're trying to reveal an instant or sorcery on the off the top of your library. Now, back when in original Innistrad, this was a lot easier to do. There was a lot of scry going on. Now, a little bit, it's not that easy when we have Consider instead of Opt, and when our one reliable scry spell is Fading Hope, which just scries 1. But it's still a thing, and it still creates tension, primarily because of what's on the other side if you do hit the flip. They did make an entire mechanic about this in Lorwyn. This was the Clash mechanic. So this one, you and your opponent each reveal the top card of your library. Now, whichever one has the higher mana value is the winner. Ties, no winner. And usually, if you win, you get a bonus with the effect. It's rare that it counts the opponent winning. I think a few uncommons do this. This one was better in the sense that it gave you the ability to pseudo scry. It's like scry. It's like a scry mini game. It also gave your opponent that same scry mini game. That's why it was not that great in the long term. It was fine for what it was. So that was, well, you can see, but you can see why it's not that high. I kind of put it higher because this is actually a black bordered mechanic that kind of fit. Now, speaking of black bordered, we are going to number 6, which, well, definitely not in black bordered anymore. This one's back in the old days when they have not fully defined what Magic's all about. We have these cards where it's about literally flipping the card up in the air, see where it lands. So so we have Chaos Orb where you flip it in 1 foot. It you wherever whatever the Chaos Orb touches, as well as the Chaos Orb itself, gets destroyed. So it's a very it was a very interesting destruction mechanic. You got Falling Star, kind of the same thing. Falling Star must turn at least 360 degrees or it has no effect. Okay, I wonder how you're going to how you're going to check that out. Also, although this one only affected creatures, so not as powerful as Chaos Orb, but then again, it's not bad for a sorcery. It came out of nowhere. It's also functionally the same cost in a sense. That said, it did open the way for. Yeah, it does not belong in black bordered anymore, but it definitely found its home in silver bordered. Plenty of cards that ask you to flip it from a certain height. In the case of Slaying Mantis, you're not just flipping the card now. You're literally throwing it at a certain distance. But at least it goes to show that mechanics that never fit regular Magic can always find a home other in other places. So there we go. Number 6, flip from above or flip from somewhere. Now this is a mechanic that originally, now this one is very very typical of most games. It's called rolling dice. Now, well, you even if you are only used to playing Magic the Gathering, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with other games like Monopoly or whatnot, where dice rolling is kind of involved. Or you played RPGs before. Dice rolling has always been important in that sense. They tried introducing it. Well, they introduced it sort of in silver bordered. It was introduced in Unglued. It never came back in Unhinged because nobody liked it in Unglued. And it turned out that the problem was more of the implementation. The problem in Unglued was that a lot of the die rolling effects were negative ones. You were rolling to avoid a certain outcome. Is in a sense, it was kind of like a gotcha. Why are you hurting yourself? That said, they improved it in they improved it in Unstable when it was all about it. There's a certain floor to a certain ceiling. It could only get better. Although in the case of Box of Free Range Goblins, I don't think you want to be paying 6 mana for one. That would be a real feel bad. Yeah, it's kind of like opening an EA loot box. That said, it did finally make its way back into black bordered. What it did help that it was the Dungeons and Dragons set, but also they kind of figured out how to make it worthwhile, where the worst possible outcome, with the exception of some rares where they did have a critical fail, where the worst possible outcome was fine. And it's more like it's fine. You pretty much just played to the worst outcome and you were not too unhappy with it, and it just got better. That said, I don't know if we're gonna see more of. I don't think we're gonna see more of the die rolling mechanic outside of Dungeons and Dragons style sets. It's kind of hard to justify, but it is there as a nice mini game of sorts. Also, it's I'm kind of using the term game quite loosely in this sense. It would be nice to see one where you and an opponent roll the die. Actually, you get some of these in the in Commander. But there you go. That's number 5. That. Hold on. Oops. Let's make sure that I did not double click too much. Okay, there you go. Number 4. Now this one predates die rolling. It's coin flipping. Now again, this one definitely shown up in black border. In fact, I don't think it didn't really belong in silver border because it's fine in black border. That said, most people begrudgingly play this if ever. Honestly, A lot of the early ones were just bad. It's like, if you take a look at the bottle Sulaiman here, you flip a coin, you either get something really good or you're just hurting yourself. So why bother? Even with the advent of Krark's Thumb and Mirrodin, it didn't exactly improve it, but they actually did get better in making coin flipping cards. Like some of the coin flipping cards in the future were pretty much like you either got an upside or you got nothing. Though the get nothing part is still bad. It's usually just like the bet. There's it's pretty much the same tech. Like you get a lesser outcome and then you get a better outcome. Though most often than not, it's the lesser outcome is still nothing. So it's not exactly that great. In fact, I would probably put dice rolling up here in number 4 if it were not for the fact that dice rolling originated in silver border. Actually, why should that stop it? Yeah, probably just reverse 5 and 4. But coin flipping is essentially a mini game in itself. Actually, a bit more interactive here because a lot of the cards just told you to call the flip in the air or have your opponent call the flip for you. Now number 3, not quite obvious what the mini game here is just from the top of these 2 cards, but this one's all about the face down cards. Now, these cards definitely predate the original appearance of Morph and Onslaught, and they were really super weird mechanics and kind of just like in a sense it's just similar to Chaos Orb where it was very weird. So a lot of these weird cards were just usually they got the axe. Illusory Mask and Camouflage did not get the axe, but they did have to solve the problem on how to make it work in the actual game, especially when 6th edition rolled around to fix the rules. The solution was to define what a face down creature is. And as soon as they came up with the definition, the original definition was supposed to be just like a 1/1 that had no stats. It was colorless, no name. The ones who came up with the solution figured, hey, maybe we could make a mechanic out of this. So it was not exactly an easy sell. It was an easier sell when instead of you pay 2 mana to put it face down as a 1/1, you pay 3 mana to put it face down as a 2/2 instead. So that's how we got Morph. And eventually in Cans of Tarkir, that's how we got Manifest. Now, usually this is pretty much a guessing game. For the most part, it wouldn't be relevant. It's like you're just bumping up against a 2/2. But depending on which set it came from, Morph did create a certain tension. Actually, this was a really interesting / very annoying if you had to play this in Onslaught block. Let's take this case for example. There's a Morph creature. It attacks. You have a 2/2 of your own. You have to choose between blocking or not blocking. If the only clue you had was your opponent was playing red, you were pretty much guessing because, oh yeah, by the way, both of these were in the same set, not block, set. So if your opponent if this was in draft, your opponent was playing red, they swung into this, you had to guess whether you wanted to flip or not flip, and block or not block. If you blocked and it turned out to be a battering Craghorn, you lost your 2/2 for nothing. If you did not block and it turned out your opponent had a Skirk Commando, you would still lose your 2/2 for not block, even if you didn't block. So that was probably one of the design mistakes they made with Morph. They learned that lesson in Khans of Tarkir. They came up with this guideline where a morph that can take out a 2/2 when unmorphed, the unmorph cost has to be 5 mana or more. And they pretty much stuck with that. If I remember correctly, the cheap morph ones, it would still just trade, and even the morph where it was like you unmorph for 4 mana, it was a 5/2, so it would still trade. So they really stuck with their guns on that one. Manifest was a little bit trickier because you had to guess whether that thing would unmorph or not, but it was actually more of a value mechanic. Even if you didn't see the card that came out of it, whatever, you still got the 2/2 for relatively free. depending on the card that produced it. So no, you can't exactly play a shell game with Morph and Manifest. You're not allowed to do so in the rules. But just figuring out what's underneath based on what your opponent has, that was kind of a game in itself. And that was the game that we pretty much played, especially in limited block. Onslaught limited, Cons limited, that was the situation. So it's kind of high up here in number 3. Now number 2, this before all this morph thing. Now this one is the part where you had to guess the name of a card. Now this one appeared in many variations. The very first variation of this was Vexing Arcanics. Actually, this one was very interesting because back in the day, they did not release card names at all. We don't have the spoiler seasons that we have today. Back then, what cards did was always under lock and key. And then they printed Vexing Arcanics, which created a conundrum when it came to the pre-release. So 3 and tap, target player names a card and then turns over the top card of her library. If that is the card name, put it in hand. Otherwise, put in the graveyard, and Vexing Arcanics deals 2 damage to that player. Now all is well and good, but you had to know the names of the cards. It was easy if you were targeting yourself. You kind of use this as like really bad card draw. If you were using it on your opponent, if you were using it in your opponent, the card name was still quite relevant there. In fact, there is another card that I should be showing here instead of this one. It's, now that I think of it, it looks like a Mobius strip. Hold on, let's search it up. Nope, nope. This is the card, Vexing Arcanics. And then they would come up with other variations of this. Booby Trap was a certain variation. You had to know that. You definitely had to know the names of cards in your opponent's deck in order to set off the Booby Trap. But the primary one that everyone knows this one for is Cabal Therapy, where you have to name the card before you even look at it, your opponent's hand. So this one's the game of how well do you know your meta. Oddly enough, this card was a lot better when you were going second, because you would at least get some context clues based on the land your opponent played. Now the flashback of sacrifice a creature was supposed to give you a second shot when you had more information, but we do get this game of naming cards. Actually, from Cabal Therapy, we got the series of cards where you have to name a card, and then you search your opponent's hand, library, graveyard, exile all copies of that card. Started with Cranial Extraction in Kamigawa, and we still get that effect to this day. It's an interesting game, especially if you do not know what. If you were calling it blindly, like I believe Legend VD was playing this game with Curse of Silence when he was doing his Curses deck. He was running Curse of Silence, he was using his meta knowledge to name cards off the top of, well, not off the top, but naming cards that would be cursed by Curse of Silence, getting hit with attacks. Actually, very funny. There was one match where he was naming the best green-blue cards because those were the ones he was afraid of. But if he had known that his opponent was literally playing a precon out of the box, and he was aware of what was the contents of that precon, he would realize that naming Coma was a miss. I think he named a Froghemoth, that was also a miss because neither card was straight out of the box in that precon. So it's a game of how well do you know your meta. But then again, so we had the very weird set of top 10s, but now we get to the number 1, which one can argue is the true game. And it started off with Goblin Game, but it's a game of everyone secretly choosing a number. And then there's a positive or a negative effect based on highest number, lowest number. So Goblin Game, it was secretly hide a certain number of items. Eventually it was Actually, the rules text is still the same, but for tournament play, they've ruled that you can just get a piece of paper, write the number, and you can just hide it there that way. So there's been an effect. It's actually very similar to a version of Marbles. Like, that's a very fun game. I never got to play it as a kid, but it looks like a very interesting game, right? It's a relatively fun. Never mind. But this one is probably the purest form of game theory, especially if you're playing in a commander setting. In fact, if where like you have to choose a number, your opponent chooses a number. Basically, you're in a sense, it's like gambling on how badly do you want a certain effect to happen. How sure are you that you want it to happen? Like, for example, if we were to play Wheel of Misfortune right off the bat, you can if you really want to draw cards, you can name as high as 39. That's pretty much a sure hit in Commander, but that's kind of super risky. You probably don't want to do that unless you can win the game right off the bat. So there is a certain amount of risk, and there's also the pressure, especially in a multiplayer format. Like I need to draw cards, but I also need to preserve my life total. Like, how high am I willing to go? How low am I willing to go? And the problem is, what are my fellow players thinking? Because it would be a disaster if all of you guys chose the same number. You'd all take damage and you'd all get nothing. Kind of wish we got more of this effect, especially for Commander. But this is probably the most interesting mini game within the game of all. I would say that we're more likely to see Morph and Manifest come back. We will continue to have this other sorts of mini games along the way, but that's the nature of Magic. It's not just about flipping cards and thinking of effects, although that was kind of the lower half of the top 10. But it's really about extending the real decision making, like adding decisions upon decisions. That's what makes this game really great. So, and I would like to see a lot more of this in the future. Maybe not in big chunks because it then loses its appeal. But it's nice to have this once in a while. I would like to see this again. That's gonna be it for this episode of the Magic Arena Run Top 10. If you like what you saw, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Turn on notifications and whatnot. Are there any sort of mini games that I've missed here or that are memorable to you? Please let me know in the comments. And as always, thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you guys again next time. Take care. God bless. Stay safe wherever you are. Have a great week, everyone. Take care.